I'm Damon Wilson. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council, and I'm really delighted to welcome you here to the Munich Security Conference's first town hall experience, the first town hall format, a new experiment here at MSC this year. And we're starting with what is one of the most important issues on the international agenda right now, with one of the most important decision makers in that process. This is our update on Afghanistan. We're going to have this conversation in two parts today. This is a town hall that's meant to be interactive. We're delighted to be able to start the first part of the conversation in a conversation with the President of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani. We'll break after the conversation with the President to transition to a discussion equally about the regional dynamics impacting Afghanistan, where we'll welcome the foreign ministers of Pakistan, Uzbekistan, as well as the National Security Advisor to President Ghani and the former U.S. Secretary of State, John Kerry. I want to remind everyone that these sessions are on the record. You're welcome to tweet using the hashtag MSC2019. Mr. President, thank you so much for helping to kick off this new format here at MSC and for this conversation. Everyone is following what's unfolding in your country, the negotiations about peace, and the question of whether peace is possible. As an Afghan, even myself as an American, it doesn't often seem that we're hearing something dramatically different from the Taliban. So do you see a viable path forward for peace, or is this a bit of a fool's errand, the process that's unfolding right now? Please, Mr. President.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to see you again, the Atlantic Council, and of course, the Munich Security Conference, for giving me an opportunity. Peace is a gift. You experience the gift when you don't have it. We had it in June for 3 days through a bold ceasefire. You know what happened? Around 33,000 Taliban young fighters came to the cities. The week before, there were 1,000 casualties. In those 3 days, not one was molested, insulted, humiliated. It shows that our society is opting to overcome the past and choose the future. So on this, there's a consensus in Afghan society. But on February 12th, I had 1,000 Afghans in a public discussion. Men, women, students, the private sector, the ulama, and others. The peace that the Afghan public seeks is a sustainable peace. A peace that would last. Not one of those pieces that are concluded and within 5 years, the conflict that it re-erupts is 10 times worse. I believe that sustainable peace is possible. I would like to thank the United States, our foundational partner, for supporting the Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace process. We initiated the peace process. We decided on the ceasefire within 44 days of the declaration of the ulama of Afghanistan, and we've charted the way forward. But because peace is multidimensional, national, regional, Islamic, and international, getting the pieces right, getting alignment, is both a work of imagination and, I hope, luck and effort. Combining the three together, this is important. It's a national imperative for us. And we hope that the region that has not yet fully embraced the peace, we have partners like Uzbekistan that are remarkably engaged and wonderfully. There's the foreign minister of Uzbekistan. But there are others that need to follow that lead and come together around Turkmenistan. All of Central Asia 5, and others have been very engaged. Others we need to bring to the fold.
So, Mr. President, how do you envision, from your perspective, bringing the Taliban into the process, the Afghan-led process? How do you bring the Taliban into the framework you've built, the people have built of a constitutional republic, rather than a Taliban takeover?
Well, this is the fundamental issue. Because the question is, I've not come to assume the presidency of Afghanistan on the back of tanks or through a militia or through a civil war. I'm elected directly by the people of Afghanistan. And for the first time in the history of Afghanistan, principle was chosen over power. The government of national unity was our first peace. We avoided conflict. We showed that an inclusive political process is possible. Everybody said it would not last more than 2 days or 2 months or others. Second, we made peace with Hizb Islami. The Afghan society is absorbed Hizb Islami. Its leader is running for the presidency, and good luck to him. He needs to engage with the public. 3, we initiated the ceasefire. We offered the unconditional talks. Ergo, the talks need to take place. Bargaining needs to be hard, but it needs to be principled. There needs to be principled flexibility, not flexibility in any kind. Frank Fukuyama is a wonderful paper on elite-based peacemaking. And it's false. From the English Civil War down, it's a false notion. Peace needs to be citizen-centered, not elite-centered. And because of it, the forthcoming election in July is a must, because the people of Afghanistan must choose. One last word on this. In October, elections were held. Taliban and their supporters did everything to disrupt the election. On the day of the election, rockets were raining on certain voting centers, but the people of Afghanistan voted. What does this mean? The Republic, as again on the 12th of February, is become the focus of loyalty. This is not a person-centered loyalty. It's an institutional loyalty to the notion of republic, because from 1747 to 2014, every single one of our successions was a crisis. A civil war, an engagement, dynastic conflict, other type. I succeeded President Karzai in the first time that an elected leader succeeded in another. The people of Afghanistan value order. We are determined to go forward, because the choice that some of the Taliban are putting forward, they imagine that they can go back to 1996. That is not a choice that today's Afghanistan is going to buy in. So facilitation is important. We need to make sure that political inclusion takes place, but equally social inclusion. I tell you one story. During the ceasefire, a Talib came to Paktika, to a hospital, and asked for an examination. He was examined. So he told the doctor, "What's wrong with me?" The doctor said, "Will you not beat me?" He'd remembered the beating processes. He said, "No, I will not beat you." He said, "You're malnourished." He said, "What's malnourishment?" So they described. He said, "How can I not be malnourished?" We are offering a world of prosperity where Afghanistan's phenomenal natural resources, location, capabilities would be used. My question to Taliban and their supporters is, what's your vision for Afghanistan? Come and explain it to the people, and the people of Afghanistan elect you. We'll be delighted to turn power over to you. But power must be routinized in a strong, institutionalized state. And the building of that state is really underway.
One of the things that we're proud of at the Atlanta Council is that in a previous part of your career, President Ghani was a member of our International Advisory Board. In an interesting twist, the current American negotiator, Zal Khalilzad, is a former board member at the Atlanta Council as well. Let me ask you about that. Some have read your comments to imply that you, or they assume the Afghan government wants to be the exclusive channel with the Taliban, and that there's some degree of discomfort with how the Khalilzad negotiation process is playing out. How do you reconcile
Well,
these?
first of all, Dr. Khalilzad and I are friends of 53 years. We went on the American Field Service from Afghanistan. We went to different schools. We were 5 years together at the American University of Beirut. We're great friends, and yesterday again we met. But this is not the story of Ashraf Ghani and Zalmay Khalilzad. I'm president of Afghanistan. I represent Afghanistan. Dr. Khalilzad is of Afghan origin, but his responsibility and loyalty is primarily American. And we need to understand this. Afghanistan is a massive diaspora, and some of us have sworn loyalty to the state of Afghanistan. Some of us have dual citizenship, etc. All of this is part of richness. But we need to understand that when I speak, I do not speak as an individual. I speak as the president of a country that is given massive sacrifice. Since 2015, American casualties in Afghanistan have been 66. Prior to that, there were over 2,500. The war is not an American war. This is the wrong notion. Your sacrifice in blood has been eliminated practically. Your sacrifice in treasure has been reduced massively. You had over 100,000 troops in my country. And I was responsible for, during General Petraeus and General McChrystal's and General Allen's period, bringing the transition. We need to get the notion right. Our relationship with the United States is based on two documents, fully consulted nationally and approved through the Parliament of Afghanistan. The Strategic Partnership Agreement and the Bilateral Security Agreement. One component of this, and President Trump and I share the exact attitude, American presence in Afghanistan must be made more effective and efficient. Effective means the numbers need to be discussed as to what's the ideal number. Efficient meaning the cost needs to be reduced. And we are asking for this discussion because we are partners. The issue of who represents Afghanistan is not the question of individual. It's the question of national consensus. Who else but the government, the legitimately elected government of a country, must speak for it? If you shifted the ground to any other country, would you even ask this question? Who speaks for the government of the United States? Do you have parallel organizations, civil society speaking? Or when it comes, there are domains that are exclusively that of the government. Mm-hmm. But this does not mean that the government single-handedly arrives at this. We've called for a consultative law jirga. On the 12th, I had 1,000 people, again, from all walks of life, particularly the women of Afghanistan. On the 11th, I had the honor of confirming the ambassadorship of Adila Raz as our permanent representative to the United Nations. Our ambassadors to the United States and United Nations both are Afghan women. How many can boast of that? This is a new Afghanistan. Gender participation, youth participation, the generational change is underway. So we need to understand the values that the government stands for are reflections of the values of our people. And our public discussion is extraordinarily rich, and I'm delighted with that.
How do you manage that public discussion? How do you build a national consensus over where you're prepared to go in these?
Well, first of all, networks. For the first time in the history of Afghanistan, the women of Afghanistan from 34 provinces are going to come together in a national debate. They've already done elections at the provincial level. The youth of Afghanistan, again, from 34 provinces have come together. 2,906 of our ulama in June got together, issued a fatwa that is the model of universalist Islam. An Islam of peace, an Islam of tolerance, an Islam of interaction, reflecting the best of our civilization. And that made the ceasefire possible because their logic was so strong that the Taliban, the war does not have a religious legitimacy. Our private sector are debating. You know, when vital issues are on the table, a society mobilizes for discussion. We're bringing all the streams together in an event in Kabul called the Consultative Law Jirga, so the discussion can take place.
When is that?
It's within a month. Mm-hmm. But already, the discussion that took place, it is remarkable. 6 groups did their discussion separately. Women, civil society, youth, ulama, etc. Influentials. And there were 8 speakers. The 7th speaker who came from civil society said, if you realize something, We all are using the same phrases, the same arguments, putting the same limits. The limits for what? We don't want an interim government. We want our elected government to speak, and we want the elections to take place. We do not want the gains of the last 17 years to be reversed, and particularly strengthening of the state, a state that can speak for a dignified nation. These are the trends that are running the limits of equally the gift of peace is a gift. More than that, in Islam, it says, Solo khairun. It's not that peace is desirable. Peace is a duty. If you can spare one life, you've gained the world. If you kill one person without due process, you've committed murder against the world. Our Islamic values must come into play. The interpretations of those that are without deep roots in our Islamic tradition must be challenged. So the debate is national, it is within frameworks of value and the validation of the Constitution, but particularly the statement, if the Constitution needs to be amended, it must be amended through constitutional processes.
So let me ask, typically a complicated, difficult diplomatic process is not something that plays out easily when you're in election season. So you're headed towards elections in July. I think I've heard Ambassador Khalilzad say he has the aspiration of trying to see some of these things perhaps come to conclusion, if not make good progress before those elections. How do you correlate 18 candidates running for your office with the difficulty it takes to build a consensus around peace?
Well, I give you an example of how what it takes to bring 18 candidates together. We amended the election law. Every single one of them signed on to the amendments. When it comes to major national issues, you must have the flexibility to operate. They thought somebody recommended that that the president of Afghanistan should select the head of the election commission. And they were worried that that's going to bring it. I said, absolutely not. Put any mechanism, any process, and they suggested the process. On peace, there's not a major political difference on the desirability of the peace. If peace dawns and the gift of peace is possible, society will mobilize. But the price of peace is not something that the society has agreed on. We offered unconditional talks, not unconditional peace. And if you want to see, conduct a free, open survey of what are reactions to the gatherings in places like Moscow of the Afghan public.
Mm-hmm. I can draw you out on that. There was a reaction to some of the talks that took place in Moscow. Obviously, the regional element is significant. Both your neighbors, Iran, Pakistan, we have the foreign minister of Uzbekistan here as well. Can you talk a little bit about the regional dynamic of your neighbors, but also a little bit further afield as you think about the Russia and Chinese role as well?
Sure, absolutely. In order to get to peace, we need to understand the war. The war is multidimensional. A tragedy brought United States to Afghanistan, but mutual sacrifice has consolidated this relationship. But this is not a forever relationship. It's a relationship based on mutual interest and mutual respect. Context changes. So what has the United States done? At our request, it removed the taboo on the American presence. It made the discussion possible. During President Karzai, this was taboo. He never broke the taboo. We broke the taboo. But that doesn't mean that it's going to tomorrow's departure. It means a process. The second issue, both for the region and for the world, how long will the threat of terror haunt us? I formulated a concept called the fifth wave in the Munich Security Conference 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. From anarchism, this is the first wave of political violence. Australia, to my knowledge, is the only country that in its national security strategy says, and this is in 2016, I believe, that the threat is 2 decades. What is the response of the region and the global community to this? Because on that question depends. If Afghanistan is abandoned, we will make it. We have no complex about being a nation or having an enduring history. Patriotism runs deep, and support for our security sector is unbelievable. In the last 100 years, our security forces have not had this kind of support. And I'm enormously proud to fulfill the role of the Commander-in-Chief. I think after decades, there was a president that was willing to play Commander-in-Chief, and I've taken pride. I've visited every garrison, I deal with them routinely, and I'm moved to tears by their sense. You know, when I go to visit our security forces, you know what they ask? Close air support, better equipment, etc., medical evacuation. I've yet to see one of them ask me for some kind of charity. They're not seeking charity, and they're enlisting despite the casualties. So this dimension is very significant. Second, the region must come to a common understanding. Central Asia has come to this common understanding. Again, I'd like to praise Minister Komilov, President Mirziyoyev, and equally Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan afield, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, all of it. Central Asia, after 117 years of separation, is looking south, we're looking north. And we've shown the advantages of cooperation. Our trade is multiplying day by day. Our relationship, and we are beginning, laying the massive infrastructure for transferring of energy from Central Asia to South Asia. There's a word to it. India has been a partner in peace, not in war. And this needs to be set for the record, because there are other understandings. If you see a Pakistani taxi driver in New York, they assume for granted that there are 22 Indian consulates. They're not. China has been a partner. Our view of the region is that Afghanistan is a roundabout, an Asian roundabout, where all the region can come together and interact. So the choice is twofold. I articulated this in the Shanghai conference. A platform for cooperation or a breeding ground for terrorism. It's our location, it's not our people. Because we are at the heart of Asia, and that determines the rhythm. President Xi and others endorsed the notion that Afghanistan should become a platform for cooperation. This is work ahead of us, but there are other tensions. Leadership in the current context of Afghanistan and globally is about managing uncertainty. I've not had a year where I could hold assumptions constant. I need to build in. So when the South Asia strategy was announced, and I really praise it, it was a game changer. Everybody argued that it was condition-based. I said, no, it's conditionality-based. We accelerate our strengthening and our efforts because we need to take advantage of this open moment, this window of opportunity.
Mr. President, let me ask you one last question, and I want to bring in our colleagues in the audience, so please catch my attention and we'll bring a mic to you. We're here in Germany, and Afghanistan has a fairly significant place in the German psyche, the Bonn Agreement. You mentioned the gains that have been made over the past 17 years, obviously the German contribution within NATO and Afghanistan. How do you, if you think back to where things were at the time of the Bonn Agreement, what kind of, if you step back and look at what's happened in your country away from the news of today, what do you think are the most significant changes? What gains are you referring to over that time?
Sure. The first thing is, I'd like to praise Germany, an enormously important partner, a partner that has undertaken immense sacrifice in terms of its military presence. For the first time, Germany stepped out and engaged the world, and it's been a remarkable engagement. Second, for very principled support. Afghanistan and Germany celebrated our 100th anniversary, and I have the distinction of being the grandson of the first Afghan ambassador to Germany. So it really runs deep, and for years, having taught Weber and Zimmel in Habermas, I'm deeply marked by German culture, and it's a remarkable thing. I'm actually reading a book on the second industrial revolution called Scope and Scale. Germany offers us a lot, and it's offered us a lot. What has happened? What have been the gains? And I went after 24 years to Afghanistan on December 26, 2001. And I went to 10 provinces, but first thing I did was to land in Bagram because Kabul airport was mined. The Shumali plain was a sight from Dante's hell. All the 10 provinces that I went within 3 weeks were devastated. I went to my ancestral village. I embraced about 600 men. They were bones, skin and bones. I visited my colleagues at Kabul University. They all looked as though they had become doormen. None had closed. It was really a devastated country. At that time, our resilience, and I flew over 20 provinces, I could see from the top, there wasn't house standing. The social, we were almost at the end of our coping capabilities. In 5 years of drought, it had taken a huge toll. Today's Afghanistan is moving out of that transition. So what's the first gain? A constitution. The Afghan public, through debate and discussion, agreed to have a democratic Islamic constitution. This is the most Islamic constitution in the region. Put it to the test. So when people say, what's your identity? It is in a deeply Islamic culture, and we are very proud of it. Second, my colleagues around you. Afghanistan of today has unbelievable capability, and we are very fortunate. From my generation, Dr. Qayyumi, our Minister of Finance, who was president of San Jose State University and an educationalist, winner of Medal of Honor from the Silicon Valley, one of the 12 people. From Dr. Moheb, Minister Saleh, my other colleagues, and the participation of the women. Come to any of our meetings, see whether foreign delegations have more women in positions of influence or the Afghan women. These are important gains. But the issue, most fundamental issue in today's Afghanistan is that it's not confined to Kabul. It's countrywide. The dialogue in Herat, in Badakhshan, even in Ghor or in Paktika. I was in Paktika in Helmand. And what was the most important request? And this from elders. Education and education of women. 14 years ago in Paktika, there wasn't a single school for girls in the capital, Sharana. Today, their request is a high school and several schools for girls right there. It's a different discourse. It's a functioning, and in terms of ability to pay for ourselves, we had no money. In 4 years alone, we've increased our revenue by 90%. We can, by 2024, meet our security needs and our recurrent budget. We passed 390 laws. There was no bankruptcy law. Municipal law had not been amended in 100 years. The mining sector, a legal foundation for a functioning state, has been created. In corruption, even in corruption. This year, we were the top reformer in the Doing Business indicators of the World Bank. Out of 10 reformers, we were the top. And in Transparency Internationally, we're finally making our way because the sequential issue. What is at stake is the life of 35 million people who have done no harm to the world. But for 40 years, we've experienced a scale of violence that any other thing, any other group of people would have been broken. Our resilience is our most important capital because we're embracing the future. With all the tragedies that we've suffered, wherever I go, people are embracing the future. They want to build. They don't want to destroy. And then those who make the destruction possible need to be asked the question, what if they gain from it? What is the advantage to them? What is the advantage to the world from a policy where support for that level of violence? Our hospitals have been attacked, our schools have been attacked, our mosques have been attacked, our shrines have been attacked. What is the senseless level of violence? What does it bring?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think it's important, 17 years, to have that perspective. Let me invite some of the guests to come on in. If you'd like to grab a seat, I'll take a couple of questions. This gentleman here and the front row here as well. Please, let me take both of these questions, Mr. President. Catch my eye, please.
Thank you very much. President Ghani, Fred Kagan, it's a pleasure to see you, sir.
Very good to see you.
It's sad to say that for all the progress that you have described, which is very real, the Afghan security forces are unfortunately not in control of all of the territory of Afghanistan, including some rather important areas. Can you talk a little bit about what Afghanistan needs specifically in order to regain control and maintain control over all of its territory?
Thank you, Fred. And let me take the second question so you can have both, please.
Thank you. Of course.
Mr. President, President Trump has indicated he would like to pull out half the U.S. troops this year. Can you talk about what the consequences of that would be and how it would affect negotiations? And do you worry that the current negotiations, without including the Afghan government, could sell Afghanistan out?
Well, thank you. First of all, it's wonderful to see you, but pleasure. On the 10th, I was in a place called Ghani Khil in Shinwar. 2 years ago, General Nicholson dropped a 20-ton bomb. Today, Daesh has been expelled from all of southern Nigra. I met with 2,500 people in a place. Ghani Khil was the headquarters of Daesh and Taliban. We have made very significant progress in Nigra. Helmand, where you remember 20,000 troops, southern Helmand has become secure. Kapisa, again, similarly. A dynamic is unfolding. We have a 4-year security plan, which we've completed the first year. As part of this, the commando force is being doubled, the air force is being tripled. Continuing with this 4-year plan is essential. But we've also carefully reviewed the cost. The cost of the Afghan security sector was currently 6.2 billion. We can save 2 billion. And 2.2 billion is going to counterterrorism. 2 billion is easily affordable. And if a crunch comes, we can raise that. Continuation of the relationship, and again, let me emphasize, the American role is advice and assist. It's a training role. I pay tribute to the families of Gold Stars because I know Gold Star families and I know you always visit them, so please thank them, all of us. The son of General Kelly lost his life in Afghanistan, and it's one of the most moving pieces of tribute that I've seen. It was Helmand. General Kelly said, he decided, the son decided to be in the right place at the right time. Continuing this relationship is fundamental to both our interests. The question, am I worried? Half of the troops? No. This is not a relationship that is number dependent. It's a relationship that is interest dependent. Troops come. Please don't forget, Mr. Rubin, President Obama wanted to reduce the number to 1,400 embassy-based. And it took us 2 years of discussion to persuade him. Why was he persuaded? Because we were doing our thing. And President Trump gave us an enormous opportunity that Afghans will always be grateful, which is called the South Asia Strategy. The South Asia Strategy is working. We need to make sure that the promise of South Asia Strategy is delivered. And the goal of South Asia Strategy is an enduring peace. It's not abandonment. Dr. Khalilzad is engaged in discussions, but there are 4 pieces. One, the relationship of Taliban terrorist organizations. 2, the size and presence, duration of US forces in Afghanistan. 3, direct negotiations between Taliban and the Afghan government for ceasefire. And he's on record, and we believe it, that all must be done together. If the sequence in terms of discussion is highlighted, the first 2 issues, it doesn't mean that the others. We had a meeting yesterday, and look at this tweet, we've had a good meeting.
Mr. President, I'm going to take one last question, and then we'll transition to the regional discussion. Let me invite Milan Vivir, please.
Of course.
Hello, Mr. President. Good
Hello,
to see you
Ambassador.
again.
Pleasure.
I was reading the statement that the Taliban put out at the Moscow conference in terms of their commitment to women's rights. And it's, could be interpreted as a very positive statement, opens up about girls needing to be educated, et cetera. But then they rail against certain values that are not Afghan Islamic values, and it's a very restrictive interpretation of Sharia that could set the picture that you just painted for us for women back significantly. So how, in a process going forward, an Afghan-led process with the Taliban, how do you ensure that that process is sufficiently inclusive that the women who want peace more than anybody, given how much they've suffered, aren't fearful as they are, many are, and you know that, and you've made efforts to reach out, fearful that their rights are going to be part of what's traded in the back and forth of a actual agreement?
Well, thank you, Best, and thank you for the immense amount of work you've been doing for the women of the world, including the women of Afghanistan. Isn't it ironic that Taliban have no difficulty meeting with U.S. women ambassadors, and yet are afraid of meeting with Afghan women? That's an irony. How do they justify meeting with American and European women in position of influence, but not with Afghans in positions of influence? 2, the Islam that I represent demands the rights that the first wife of the Prophet, the first Muslim, Bibi Khadija, had. She was the largest, most influential merchant of Arabia and possibly of the world. And the second wife of the Prophet, Bibi Aisha, who transmitted most of the sayings of the Prophet, an educated woman, a political leader, and a military leader. Who speaks the origin of Islam in the tradition of the Prophet as a guide, or an interpretation arrived at in 1996? Second, the statement is exactly the statement of 1996. So do not take those statements at face value. Third, this is a question now for the Afghan society, and particularly for the forthcoming Law Jirga, that we define. My grandmother was a formidable force. She was educated. She was educated in exile in India and came back. Her 6 sons, her daughter, and all her grandchildren got educated. I'm living proof that when you educate a woman, you change 5 generations. I want the position of authority that my grandmother had for my daughter and granddaughter. If they cannot buy into this, there's nothing un-Islamic about the participation of the woman. We need to look at Malaysia, we need to look at Indonesia, Qatar, where they have no difficulty receiving support. The University of Qatar is majority of the University of Qatar are women. Its president was a colleague, a number of things, including the Atlantic Council, is a distinguished leader. On what ground are they rejecting? We need to engage in this discussion because their experience of women is derived from years of deprivation in the camps and being in madrasas. Which interpretation of Islam? Afghan society is 99.9% Muslim. Islam is not a debate. The interpretation that we must embrace is a national discussion, and this is a vibrant society. We've contributed immensely to the Islamic culture and civilization, particularly during the Abbasid period and subsequent. We're a roundabout. Let's embrace openness and make sure that Our differences are within limits, and that limit is an Islamic constitution that all of us can adhere to.
Thank you for the important question, Milan. Thank you, Mr. President, for sharing your thoughts with us. It's a pleasure to have you here in this new town hall format. We're going to transition to a regional conversation right now, so please join me in thanking President Ghani for his time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.